Hello, and welcome back as we continue with Phantom. Strange as it may seem, once I had gained that small measure of freedom, I no longer occupied myself with thoughts of escape. All my life I had been sheltered from the outside world, and I was as yet too ignorant of its ways to survive alone. I wished to eat at reasonable intervals and have a roof of sorts over my head. Javert provided these basic necessities of life, and I choose to remain obediently at his side for much the same reasons that tie a stray dog to a cruel master. His authority was the boundary of my world, at a time when I was still a child to need such boundaries and the sense of order and place they bestowed. I belonged to him, and perhaps for no better reason than I simply needed to belong. Moving became an integral part of my life, and I quickly learned to embrace the instinctive restlessness of the gypsies and absorbed their mystical ways. I soon recognized signs that Romany travelers had left in their wake, signs that passed unnoticed to the eyes of the uninitiated. A birch twig denoted danger ahead. White feathers, the presence of chickens in the area. Branches of fir announced a wedding. Silent and observant, I soon became as steeped in Romany customs and skills as any gypsy born on the open road. Once it was discovered that my eyes were adapted to the dark better than any cat's, I was immediately singled out for the ancient practice of shiving drab. In the attempt of a gap-toothed old woman, famed for her herbal knowledge, I was taught how to prepare a poison capable of killing a pig without contaminating its blood. And then, in dead of night, I would be sent creeping into a nearby farm to administer the poison to some unfortunate beast. Most gypsies will not thieve at night for fear of encountering the spirits of the dead. But as Javert pointed out in drunken wit, the dead were hardly likely to object to my presence. Next morning, when the farmer was puzzling over the mysterious demise of his pig, one of the tribe would appear at the door begging for food. Almost invariably, they would get presented with a dead carcass, the farmer being anxious to get it off his hands, fearful lest the death heralded some deadly outbreak of disease. I hated this practice and never ate meat procured in this manner. It became known as one of my eccentric ways, that I would go hungry rather than share in such a meal. And eventually, as performances in my tent grew steadily more professional and lucrative, I refused to undertake this distasteful task anymore. That night that I threw the vial of Dreo over the campfire and told the tribe to procure their own miserable carry in the future was a strange turning point. No one moved to punish me. No one struck me to the ground for my disobedience. And then it was known as I suddenly came to realize I was not without power. Power. The concept began to appeal increasingly as I perfected my ventriloquistic skills and sat long into the night, devising increasing complex magic tricks to enchant the crowds. By the time I had passed 2 summers with the gypsies, my fame was already beginning to run before me, and the camp was growing unusually prosperous as a result. I was the main attraction at every fair. People came for miles to see me perform, and though I still hated the moment of unmasking, there was a moment of satisfaction in the breathless hush which greeted my stinging and my displays of legerdemain. Power. Once I had begun to seek it actively, my power came to me in many curious and unexpected ways. My period of instruction in the wise woman's tent had sparked an acute interest in the herbal properties she sold at all the summer fairs. She had remedies for every conceivable human disorder, and since everything that caused the human race to suffer was inevitably of consuming fascination to me, I began to study her skills with stealthy industry. She was ugly enough herself to be largely untroubled by my presence, and I think she was flattered by my questions. But then, I began to experiment with tried and trusted remedies. She was furious and threatened to put a curse upon me. I think that would have been the end of my tuition, but at the same night she was stricken with a fever that yielded to none of her proven recipes. The rumor went around the camp that she was dying of a deadly contagion, and with cold and pitiless logic the tribe repitched their tents at a safer distance. "Surely someone will go to her," I protested uneasily. Javert looked at me with mild surprise from the stick he was patiently whittling. "There's nothing to be done for a mortal fever," he told me placidly. "It's only common sense to keep away." A strange fury gripped me that owed virtually nothing to pity, but a great deal to mortal impotence and complacency. There was no better way to raise a demon in my brain than to tell me something could not be done. Impossibility was not a concept I acknowledged. I got up quietly, without breathing a word of my intention, and crossed the void to the old woman's tent. I could see as I looked at her that she was in a very bad way, and I felt the same frustration I had once experienced when I dismantled my mother's clocks. Unbelievable irritation in the face of my own inadequacy and limited competence. Well, I had learned to master the mechanicism of a clock, and would not be defeated this time either, not by some miserable pestilence invisible to the naked eye. I was not moved by any feeling of common humanity or affection. This was simply a challenge I could not resist. While the old woman lay moaning in her pallet, completely insensible of my presence, I pulled out the ancient copper pans and began to heat an infusion of my own. She lived. The infection spread all throughout the camp, afflicting almost half of the sturdy gypsy children, who had seldom known a day's illness in their lives. Those who were treated with the traditional infusions died. The 3 who were treated with mine lived. Beginner's luck, perhaps, but after such a strange and timely coincidence, legends are born. After that incident, the tribe began to treat me with increasingly wary respect. The entire encampment, riddled with superstition, took to explaining my rapidly expanding skills as a natural talent for dealing with unseen forces. A story went around the campfire that I was a scholar of ancient Gypsy legend, the 10th graduate of the College of Sorcery, who had been trained in payment to serve as the devil's apprentice. It was said that I know all the secrets of nature magic, and I rode a dragon, which dwelt high in the mountains of Hermannstadt, slept in the cauldron where thunder brewed. The change in my status was remarkable. Small children no longer threw stones and chanted names when I appeared. If I passed by their tents in the daytime, they ran away from me, as though I were the devil in person, shrieking for their mothers, who now used my name to ultimately threat to enforce obedience. "Hush, or Erik will come and take you to his tent. You will never be seen again." Boys of my age, who had made my life misery during the early months in the tribe, now left me alone, fearing terrible retribution if they angered me, and since it was comfortable to be free of their torment, I did everything in my power to foster the growth of my grim reputation. Power. I was beginning to acquire a taste for it, to see it as a very satisfactory substitute for happiness, for love. By the time I had spent 3 summers with the gypsies, I was puzzling aware that everyone in the camp regarded me with some degree of unfounded terror. Yes, everyone was afraid of me by them. Everyone except Javert. Legend though I might be, I was still his creature, and he never let me forget that for a second. Well, that's the end of that chapter. See you soon.